Did that on purpose. Are you on mute? Wait.
Good evening or good afternoon. I'd like to call the General Plan Working Group to order. Today is Thursday, September 7th, 2023. And can we have roll call, please?
Chairman Walt Stanish.
Here.
Vice Chair Lisa Hetchman. Here. Edwin Okamura.
Here.
Tom Donnelly.
Here.
Emmett Holtzlander.
Here.
Judith Adamson. Art Darden. Absent. Rick Dolk.
Here.
Lisa Duke. Here.
All right. Can you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next up is public comment. Anyone that would like to speak on anything that's not on the agenda tonight can come up and speak.
Hello, Aiden Mayhood. I just wanted to bring up a concern that my life has been revolving around lately, and that has to do with Flannery Associates and California Forever. So this is my first meeting that I've come to for this working group, and I hope that it's a discussion that you guys have, throughout the years to come within this group, because I've been reading the Solano County General Plan, and I've seen that their goal is to make sure that the existing communities within the county, most of the development stays within them. And I hope it stays that way. And I hope that you guys, fight to make sure that future developments don't threaten our open space and agricultural areas surrounding Rio Vista. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Nobody online?
Fast runner.
There's no one online.
Okay, I'll close public comment. Action items, approval of the minutes of August 3rd, 2023. Does anyone have any discussion about it, or do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion that we approve them as submitted.
Okay, Tom, we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Edwin.
Chairman Walt Stanish.
Yes.
Vice Chair Lisa Hetchman. Yes. Edwin Okamura.
Yes.
Tom Donnelly.
Yes.
Emmett Holtzlander.
Yes.
Judith Adamson.
All right, we're gonna go into discussion items, but I have a posted note, and Aiden will appreciate this. Since our last meeting, we didn't know who Flannery really was. How and what is going to change our general plan? I mean, what do we do?
We're all still trying to figure out what this will mean to the city. It could
Mhm.
have profound implications if what we've been reading is correct. We will be talking about circulation this afternoon, this evening. Carly Hoyt with Parent Peers will be mentioning the implications for Flannery and what that might mean to a Highway 12 realignment. I'm also going to be talking to you about a suggested change to the planning area, which is driven by the fact that we just found out that apparently Flannery does intend to develop something we didn't expect until just recently. So I believe that the concern that was expressed is one that's well beyond the city of Rio Vista. That will be will certainly weigh in, but this will be a county decision whether any urbanization in a new city could be incorporated. So we'll certainly be active in the discussion, but it won't ultimately be the choice of the city council or this group.
Anybody else want to comment about it while we're on it?
No.
Okay.
I do, just quickly, I think that there were, at least in the, I think it was in the noise and in the open space one, I had just provided feedback, given some of the things that we now know, not specifically about Flannery, but trying to incorporate this idea that might be coming and just what does it mean to the agricultural heritage that we've got here? So some of my comments in the feedback given would incorporate some ideas around Flannery and how to do that.
And whether it's related to Flannery or anything else that we have a greater understanding as we're going forward, any of these elements, we can go back and take a final read and say, gosh, now what we know at this point, we really should have emphasized something more clearly, brought up other points. So this is a live document ultimately until the city council adopts it.
So being that Flannery does own property within Rio Vista and obviously outside, I mean, it's a concern and it could change everything that we've already talked about, in my opinion anyways. I mean, Highway 12 for one, if they don't go ahead with that development that they're talking about with all these homes, if we only have a 2-lane bridge, I mean, traffic is just going to be horrendous. I mean, unless they're willing to put up a new bridge or do a bypass, I mean, it's going to be a nightmare. I mean, it's going to be difficult enough when they start construction on Highway 12 through the city, but I can't imagine adding all those cars and commuters. I mean, it's just, so I mean, all of what we've done is great, but I think we kind of maybe have to relook at it a little bit because we need to tweak it because of Flannery's in our face right now. And we know what they're doing or want to do anyways.
Yes, when we really started writing this plan, we had a certain assumption that nothing would happen on Flannery
Right.
for at least the term of this general plan. And I suggest it's probably still the case because what they're talking about is a very long-term
Right.
development program that's
Right.
going to be measured in decades, not years.
One thing.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I saw an interview with our representative, Mike Thompson. I think he's one of the only ones that's actually met with them.
Right.
And he walked out of the meeting and said that they don't have any plan. They have a very vague concept.
Right.
And so, and the other thing is we know that most of the county is in opposition so far at this point, to even the concept. And so what's frustrating is we're kind of in this window where we're trying to complete this in the next 6 months. And we're not going to really know really what their plan is. We just have a very vague concept.
Right. And
I'm not sure about that, but I think that what at some point we may see is Flannery asking for a vote of the people so that they can possibly influence the outcome of the decision by referendum.
Lisa, can you use your microphone? That's okay.
I just read something today that just said that Solano County already has measures in place to keep cities from growing outside of the way they are now, and that anything that's done outside of that has to go through a vote on a ballot. So
I wasn't aware of that, but
I can send you what I read. I mean, I don't know
it'd be
if that-
interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we have a comment from our City Manager.
Christina Miller, City Manager. I just wanted to note that I am aware that they can place the referendum on the ballot and circumvent county zoning as well as CEQA. So I'm happy to have legal counsel provide more guidance on that, but I've been through that process previously in my previous position, so I'm aware that it is possible.
Thank you. Any other comments before we go on to our discussion items? No? Okay. All right, 4.1, review Highway 12 circulation mobility options. Paul.
We have Carly Hoyt with Fair and Pierce here. Carly's going to take us through a discussion of both the Highway 12, and then we'll go into the circulation element, goals and policies. So with that, Carly, you're up.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, Carly Hoyt with Fair and Pierce. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. We can go to the next slide.
You almost have to talk on it.
Next slide, please. So for the agenda today, as Paul mentioned, we'll talk about SR 12 and the Rio Vista Bridge, and then I'll focus on the preliminary draft circulation goals and policies. And then Paul will take back over for the remaining section of the meeting. Slide. So you can go one more. Thank you. So as far as the Rio Vista Bridge and SR 12 in the city, the primary discussion point is really whether or not the city of Rio Vista does or does not support a bypass. I just want to know upfront, which you all are aware of, this is a very complicated issue, and it's unlikely that there's going to be a single solution that everyone in the community is happy with. From previous planning documents and conversations that we had at the general plan workshop, it seems like for decades now, the community has really been divided on this issue as to whether a bypass is good or bad for the community. And there are pros and cons to each of the alternatives that we'll discuss. But at the end of the day, the intent of this discussion is really, again, to identify what policy and direction should be included in the general plan for the next years. So the general plan is the guiding document. This is the perfect time as it will influence what happens in the future. For an example of this, there are multiple kind of planning documents. These are just some of the bigger ones in the last 20 years that are included on here. The last two in particular are the ones that I'll kind of focus on. It's the realignment and Rio Vista Bridge preliminary study, and then SR 12 comprehensive evaluation and corridor management plan. And just to give an idea of kind of how these policies can help shape future analysis in the realignment and bridge preliminary study, multiple alternatives were evaluated, and kind of pros and cons to each of those alternatives were written out, and consistency with the general plan is one that's discussed in each one of those. And so trying to determine if this is something that the city did or did not support when weighing the pros and cons of those various alternatives. It's not necessarily the sole criteria, and it won't have sole influence on the location of it, but it is a factor that is considered. So go to the next slide, please. So the latest Caltrans plan that really did a deep dive into the SR 12 corridor, it was from I-80 all the way to I-5. So it focused on multiple segments, and it identified some short-term plans, the 2015 to 2020 improvements, as well as a long-term, which was 2020 to 2035. So as far as the short-term plan kind of improvements specific to Rio Vista, it included the SHOP project, which is currently ongoing. ITS installation, which is intelligent transportation systems, can kind of just help inform motorists of kind of conditions on the roadway, travel times, all of that, weather conditions, incidents. The finalizing the Rio Vista Bridge alignment was one of the items listed as the short-term plan, and then short-term movable bridge enhancements. So the next slide. Oh, this is a little hard to see. So this is really what I wanted to focus on tonight. And it really is going to be, I'm facilitating, so I want your feedback on all of this. This is a screenshot from the plan. This is the long-term 2020 to 2035 improvement. So you can see on here, it breaks it up kind of segment by segment. So it talks about a 6-lane highway kind of in the Suisun City Fairfield area, dropping down to a 2-lane enhanced barrier separated highway. This document is very clear that in the segment between 113 and 160, SR 12 would be a 4-lane divided highway. It shows kind of 2 alternative locations. One would be north along really the airport road corridor, and then one would be south of the existing SR 12. But then in the text and in this document, it clearly says, even if SR 12 is not realigned, the future direction is a 4-lane divided highway. And then obviously it tears down after that. So I do just want to note that this is a 2012 document, and obviously at that time, Flannery and potential changes were not known, and they are not incorporated in kind of any of these previous planning efforts. So while the Flannery project is still very early in its stages and kind of in the infancy stage, I would say, I mean, the land has been acquired, and so the possibility of it coming to fruition is high, and it is a very real thing to be taken into consideration when we're looking at the community and how you really want SR 12 in your community to look. And so like I said, yeah, there's two kind of screenshots, or two potential locations. The current general plan very clearly states that Airport Road should be the bypass. That's the preferred location for the bypass. In some of the planning documents that came out afterwards, the city did issue statements stating that that is not the case and that airport should not be where the bypass is due to impacts to some of the existing developments and planned future developments. So obviously, if that has or hasn't changed, that's something that we want to talk about tonight. And then aside from these two, there were some other alternatives that were included in the 2010 study. A lot of them were kind of ruled out as infeasible at that time due to either environmental concerns or other issues. And so I think that's probably why Caltrans included these two primary potential bypass locations. So we can go to the next slide.
I have a question before
yeah.
you go to the next slide. The two bypasses would require building new bridges, is that correct?
Correct.
Either way we went. Why wouldn't we put a tunnel under there? That way we're not restricted by water traffic. And if the bridge is up, we can still move traffic from one side to the other.
So a tunnel was one of the options in the 2010 study. The location of these two would be high-level fixed bridges, so they would not be movable bridges, and there would not be any interference.
So there would be toll bridges, is what you're saying.
Most likely in the funding section, and this is another part of the unknowns of Flannery. Obviously, the cost of these bridges would be very significant, and it's unlikely that they could get funding to cover the whole thing. So bridges and tolls is one of the concerns, and we'll talk about kind of community concerns that we heard, but a toll bridge is definitely something that was voiced as a concern. I don't have an answer as to how much Flannery could or would contribute to this. They would have very significant transportation impacts on SR 12. And so it's possible that a decent amount of funding could come from that, but I don't know.
So if we did have a bypass around the town and kind of eliminate where 12 is right now through downtown, in communities where this has happened before, how does it affect the downtown businesses and all of that? Because if traffic is just going to go around us as opposed to through us, will that change the center of gravity in a sense? And would we end up with more people that were on 12 moving to the bypass?
Yeah, so as far as regional traffic, all of the regional traffic would be routed around the city, and Paul can chime in too, but I would say in my experience and in my review of various zoning codes, a lot of it comes down to kind of how the city handles the zoning and future plans. Like if a revitalization plan were to occur, for instance, that kind of really was very strategic in the way that land use would be changed along the existing SR 12 corridor and even down into the Main Street kind of area. Streetscape improvements to really encourage walking and biking and transform that portion of the town really into a destination rather than just a pass-through road. That's the best way to kind of accomplish that goal rather than have it be just kind of a forgotten roadway. So the biggest example, I live in Calaveras County and we're right next to Amador. So if anyone's been to Sutter Creek, there was the bypass through there. That is one of my favorite places to go on the weekends now because the shops are so cute. There's tons of people out, lots of great restaurants. So it is possible to transform it in a way that's to the better, but a lot of it does come down to kind of the core of your zoning code and your land use and your goals and policies in your general plan.
Yeah, and from a historical perspective, you know this, the whole RUDAT report was based on this potential realignment. And so Healdsburg is another example.
Yes.
101 bypassing Healdsburg, and it's a fantastic town now. And so there are definitely things we could do, but it's definitely a concern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is a natural concern of we'll lose this traffic, this interaction, but I think that we'll see more and more clearly through work that Carly's team has done, as well as some for our economic development team, that can now follow drivers with cell phones and
Right.
find out who's stopping. These
Yeah.
folks aren't stopping.
Yeah, I
So
was
I'm
just gonna
not
ask
sure
that.
we're really getting a
Right.
lift economically from the big road that goes through, and those folks aren't even seeing Rio Vista. They're seeing
Mhm.
Highway 12, and that's not Rio Vista.
Well, they're also not seeing Rio Vista because we haven't done a good job of advertising it from the top of our street as well. But that
Sure.
economic data, that's what I've been looking for. And I guess you're giving me the answer now. People are
Ye-
just bypassing.
We can shoot 2 slides ahead, actually.
okay.
But maybe go, I think it's 2 slides. So as Paul mentioned, we were able to actually use cell phone data because early on in the process, we heard economic development was a key kind of consideration and one of the main reasons against a bypass. And so we were able to use that data to actually track cell phone devices. And these are just for pass-through trips. So it's someone that started on one and, came across the bridge and exited the city. And we looked at how much traffic on SR 12 within the city was local versus regional. About 20% of the trips are local, about 80% are regional pass-through trips. Of the 80%, over 70% don't stop at all. About 18% are stopping for 15 minutes or less. My guess is, get gas, maybe pop into McDonald's or whatever you're stopping for, and then continuing. But the bulk of the traffic that is currently on SR 12, at least from this data source, is not stopping and spending a significant amount of time or likely money in the city.
Right. And that less than 15 minutes, do you have to stop your car for it to be recognized as a stop? Or because that could actually be just people getting off on Azevedo and rolling into town and hanging out here and at a stoplight for, as they're trying to get back on the highway.
Or traffic.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
just traffic in the city.
Yeah, we were able to exclude anyone stopped on SR 12. So basically you can see, as the device travels off
Right.
of it. So if anyone was stopped for, more than 15 minutes trying to pass through, that would not have been included in the 15-minute category. But I would have to touch base with the analyst that did it to see about someone that went even further off.
Was this for the 7 days out of the week, or was this during the Monday through Friday? Or did
This
it
was
include the weekends?
Through weekends, and the time period was from August 13th to November 18th.
And
We did
that's-
like a 3-month time period, tracking all the cell phone.
And that's 24/7.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and maybe go back one slide. So this is just some of the other community concerns that, were identified at the workshop and also in previous documents. So we talked kind of about the economic activity and impact.
I'll call for public comment.
No,
Yeah.
I missed what you said about the second bridge. About it.
So the
Annie.
correct, yeah, yeah. And a movable bridge was included as a potential alternative in the 2010 study, but because that doesn't really solve a lot of issues, it was taken out or recommended to be not considered for additional analysis. So, yeah, I think at this point, it really would be probably the high level bridge is the only way, and it would be a 4-lane as well. So, the other concern kind of against a bypass was the bridge toll, which we discussed, and then kind of concerns leaning towards possible bypass are just, the existing state of SR 12 within the community and kind of the impacts. It's not extremely conducive or comfortable for bicyclists or pedestrians. It also is negatively impacting even those traveling by auto, because you obviously can't really take SR 12 to get from the northern side of the city down to kind of the commercial area. And then yeah, so there's congestion, safety issues associated just with the heavy traffic load. So these are all the things that kind of should be taken into consideration, I guess, when weighing the pros and cons of a bypass. You know, the next slide, probably skip it since, does anyone else have questions on the data or where I'm at right now?
Does the public have, you can come up.
I was here when they worked on the general plan last time. And I know they were talking about like the freeway you're talking about going through town. They were talking about either south or north. North, the soil was too marshy and wet, and the south, I think it interfered with the airport too, and both of them did. So they never did anything about it then. But the city wanted to put it under a tunnel also like you do, but it wasn't cost effective.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I know a lot of people in the Montezuma Hills would probably fight tooth and nail to not have a highway go through the Montezuma Hills. I know I would, and I forgot the other thing I was gonna say. I know it was important, but oh, yeah, so I was gonna say, so a lot of the land in the Montezuma Hills is part of the Solano Land Trust. I know the Jeannie McCormick and Al Medved's land is, and I believe the plans for the highway would run through some of their land. And I know with Flannery entering into the area too, more farmers are gonna be looking into entering their land in the Solano Land Trust. And so you'd be dealing with a lot of development problems with that. So, and with the Solano Land Trust, they actually sell their development rights of their land to this trust, and they get a conservation easement. So there'd be a lot of problems regarding that if a highway was to go through the Montezuma Hills.
Thank you. Is there anybody online that wants to comment?
There's no one online.
We can go on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then just a couple other things to note, just some data points that we found during this effort that I thought might be relevant for this discussion. It really impacts, kind of the existing state, and if nothing is to change in the future, the Port of West Sacramento, which is where most of the vessels are, all the vessels are going from, does have plans to expand. And so right now there's an average of 3 to 5. This is from July of 2022 to May of 2023. There's currently an average of 3 to 5 vessels that pass through each day, but that number can change from 0 to 38 was really the high in a single day. Based on Caltrans data, the peak months are typically from July to October. And when the bridge opens, it typically takes about 10 minutes for a small boat or 25 minutes for the large boat. This is when it's in the open position. So obviously, as if the port is to expand, one benefit is that you might see a little bit less truck traffic because now more goods can be transported by water. But one negative is that now you have more bridge openings, which is obviously an issue for the city of Rio Vista. The CSMP in particular did a queuing analysis, and by 2035, it was estimated that if the bridge is to open for the 25-minute period, it would result in an average of a 3-mile queue every time it opens. So, 3 to 5 times a day, that's kind of what would be occurring. Yeah, so pretty long. And so, yeah, so at this point, like I said, we're here to really come to a conclusion, hopefully, as to whether or not the city does or does not support a realignment. And basically, whatever decision is decided, we'll take that and we will incorporate it into the goals and the policies. So these are just some very rough examples of if, for instance, the city is to support a realignment, we would clearly state that we would discourage widening of SR 12 and probably in coordination with Paul for land use type stuff, work in some language to encourage a revitalization of the existing SR 12 corridor to make it a little bit more, walkable, friendly, all of that. If the city does not support a realignment and you want to keep SR 12 in the existing condition, recognizing that it will probably become a 4-lane facility at some point in the future, we would incorporate goals and policies that really prioritize active transportation, grade separated crossings to kind of help facilitate the people in Rio Vista going just over SR 12 and kind of probably just have to pretend like that corridor does not exist for you from a transportation perspective. It's really just how do you get from the top to the bottom. And then, focus on alternative routes for local residents. There are certain things that could be possibly done to kind of help with even from an auto travel, like prioritizing the local streets if more signals were added or something so that traffic can move through a little bit faster. But that's kind of what we're looking at right now. So I think.
One of the things we asked Fair and Peers to do was give us short-term, midterm, and long-term solutions to reach a better relationship with Highway 12. So tonight we're really talking about the long term. Obviously, the city's not going to make the decision about a bridge. We're not going to pay for a bridge, but the position of the city will influence Caltrans. So by us actively getting behind one proposal or another, we can have influence, if not the actual decision makers. And that all really starts here in the general plan.
Yeah, I think it's important if there is a specific preferred location, north or south, that can obviously be discussed, or if no location. But the main thing for me is just if the city supports the realignment in general, and alternative to that, if the city does not support a realignment in a certain location, like the previous general plan clearly said Airport Road is what you wanted. If that's no longer the case, we can also include things to kind of help rule out these alternative locations in the future. It's just to
And-
consider.
That actually helps us a lot too. Even if you don't say what you do want, if you say, we definitely don't want this, then we can take things off the table from our perspective.
Yeah.
So any guidance you can offer will be helpful.
I have a quick question. Do we have the raw data from the various study groups and what their opinions were and thoughts were?
You're talking about the working groups?
Yes.
Meetings?
I have it. I can try to find it on my computer, if I can get the internet, but my recollection is that everything was pretty much 50-50. So it was not, I was in, I
We
kind
have
of.
power then here.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like for many years, it's been a 50-50 almost split, so.
It seems like it's gonna be a controversial issue, whatever we do, wherever we put the bypass. And I don't know if you have the answer to that, but I think maybe our city manager might. Is this something that could go on the ballot and let the voters in Rio Vista decide it?
Have the answer to that.
You can
Chris-
place any measure on a ballot to get an advisory vote. It's a way of, an official poll of residents of Rio Vista, certainly. I don't know what the procedures for placing a measure on the ballot, an advisory measure, but certainly that can be done.
Gives
That's an
us-
idea.
gives us an option.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess my only concern is that it's such a complex issue that sometimes, like, if you wanted to, I'm always going to come in from the economic development point of view. That's not going to come through on a ballot measure so much, I don't think. But I think it's an interesting idea.
We might be able to do some town halls on it and
Yeah,
get people's opinion and some knowledge beforehand too.
yeah. And I think my opinion's frankly changed over the years on what to do.
I was gonna, sorry.
Go.
No, I was gonna speak on that because for some context, in 2006, I was part of a group. Caltrans was starting to engage the city on some of their concepts here that we're seeing here. And there was a group of business owners that formed that were against it. And like Edwin was saying, I was a part of that group, but my thinking has evolved over the years because I do think in 2006, 2010, it would have been pretty impactful economically to move the highway and bypass. I think now it'd be a lot less impactful than it would have been back then. So I've evolved a little bit on that, but I am struggling with if this is even a probable thing in our lifetimes, because you look at the Caltrans improvement project that I've heard 10 different numbers. It's between 60 to $100 million that they're going to start, and that keeps getting kicked. They've pumped a ton of money into our bridge in the last 10 years. They've painted it, they've worked on it. Now, it's naive to think that the state won't just turn on a dime and say that they've wasted that money, but yeah, I think it might. There's a lot of benefits it could bring to the city. I still think it's improbable, but anyway, I don't know if that. Back in 2006 and 2010, they estimated just the bridge was going to be, and I think they talked about it there, and some of the road changes, it was going to be at least $1 billion. That was over 15 years ago. And they said at the time, they came back to our group, Caltrans did, and said, due to the population centers and the lack of the population you had, there's no way we're going to find funding for this anytime soon. And I don't know how much that's really changed.
I
Ricky-
was involved in right around 2000. I was the planner at a community up in the foothills. And we were faced with, do we want to get in line and try to get a bypass? And the thought was, well, it would be 20 years. And at the time that seemed so long. And so we never really got in line with the local transportation commission. And it just passed by. And here we are now 23 years later. And that community still has trucks that are coming through town and actually clipping the corners of buildings. It's that bad. There's like 2 state highways, turns and everything. It's a terrible situation. And yet, we didn't proactively go after it then. Would we have a bypass now? I don't know, but we certainly don't. And we're not in the queue. So we're not going to kid you. This isn't a 15-year project. It maybe not a 20-year, but if you don't start at some point, it will never happen. So.
Rick,
Well-
you said that your original thoughts are evolving on it. What's changing your mind and sending in another direction?
Well, first of all, just to be frank, we had a more vibrant Main Street back then. We had less traffic. I mean, we still complained about it, but we had much less traffic back then. And really you see the Brentwood area just kind of exploding. And I think we're getting a lot of traffic pass through coming through from then. And I actually think lessening our traffic situation in town would bring more people here. I know that sounds strange, but I think people avoid sometimes coming through this town on purpose at this point. Yeah.
Mhm.
But also, I think we didn't really need back in 2004, 2005, 2006, this kind of shot, at least in our opinions back then, a shot in the arm with economic development. We do now. I think everybody in here agrees that we need that. And so, I don't know, just as it's evolving, I think it could be a good thing.
Yeah.
Emmett,
But
you had a-
tying in somewhat with some of the comments from Rick is, it's a state highway, so how much sway are you really ever gonna have with the state? Because the state's basically gonna do what the state's gonna do. They could say, okay, we'll go ahead and do that bypass and bridge for you 5 years from now, or they may say, 50. You just don't ever know. But I mean, maybe it's worth at least getting it out there so that they know how the city feels about it. But there again, I just don't know how much sway it's gonna, create.
Yeah, I wonder, one of my concerns is, the amount of traffic increase in the last 10 years, just trying to understand where that's originating. You're talking about the growth of Brentwood and Oakley, all around the Bay Area and all, but it just seems like the whole dynamics of the circulation that's kind of coming through our area from the region has just changed so much. And I mean, part of it is, they put in Amazon warehouses over here in Antioch, and that's about 125, 150 van trips from there, and another one that's over in Fairfield. But, I'm just wondering if you've looked at kind of the higher level, just to kind of understand where all this traffic is coming from. And, discussing whether there's a way on more of a regional level that we can discourage some of the traffic on Highway 12, since we have this issue that seems like we're never going to fund, what needs to be done to fix this situation directly through our community.
When I think to add to Rick's evolution, I think in talking with people who have been here over the years, without having a ferry system that works, a lot of the locals used to be able to, you would jump off and you would go across right or through Walnut Grove, and you would jump back in, either going to Elk Grove or to Lodi. That you cannot depend upon that anymore. And I'm a little concerned that that's not even considered in here as an option to talk with the state about. Can we get a more reliable ferry service to help at least the locals with some of this pinch point? Because now, even just to get to Ryer, you've got to go across the bridge most of the time, because you can't depend upon the ferries anymore.
Yeah, that's a great point. My evolution's much the same. I started in on the whole, the realignment more like 2012. And at the time I was adamantly opposed to doing a bypass. And since that time, I've seen how the traffic has increased in our town. I also understand that if we were to do more work on the highway after they go through this 2-year process of doing the things they're going to do, it's going to have a huge negative impact on our community. And given the data, I mean, frankly, I look at the data. I mean, when you see that 80-something% of the people basically aren't even stopping in our town, that suggests to me that we need to work on economic development from the perspective of making ourselves a destination and not worry about this pass-through traffic, which when I go out there, it's probably 70% truck traffic anyway. They're not going to stop unless we set up a truck stop here, which isn't very appealing. So I'm moving more toward the whole bypass idea. Now, which side, north or south, that could be debated for sure.
I'll take public comment.
I just had another thought too. I know that the city has been developing its industrial area closer to where the airport road section of where they want to build a highway. So if that area is being planned to have more industrial spaces, that's something to consider where trucks are going to come off the highway and enter those industrial spaces. In addition, I know that a lot of parcels that Flannery wants to develop are on the north side of Highway 12. So most development's probably going to be over there. So I would figure that a highway would probably be better suited for where most people are living, which is probably going to be on the north section of Highway 12.
Anybody else?
Can't imagine why there would be any equality between the two choices, the north and the south. It seems to me that the north is absolutely to put it rather than going into those fields there. Because I don't know.
Aiden.
Aiden.
Aiden says, there already is planned industrial expansion.
Is there anybody online at all? Let's just ask.
Yes, there is.
Okay, I'm sorry.
there's no
For you
public
people
comment
online, I'm
online.
sorry, just, I can't tell.
There's no public
Nobody
comment.
comment. Okay, I'll close that part and we can go on.
So we've heard a couple of comments from alternates or members of the working group that have kind of shifted their thinking to be really opposed to a bypass to at least being somewhere around neutral or maybe interested in thinking about it. Haven't really heard collectively from the group, or I haven't gotten yet a clear sense about your feelings. As Carly described, if we keep SR 12 on its current alignment, we can anticipate that at some point in the future, it will be 4 lanes. It will go there. It probably won't go there any faster than a new bridge would get here either. So that is also probably a 20, 30-year horizon kind of change, but it is the ultimate future if that's what we're going to plan for.
I have a quick question about that. When you say it goes to 4 lane, is that working with the same bridge we have? I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, so the existing bridge would be a bottleneck. I mean, in reality, the highway could be widened to 4 lanes, but you're still gonna have major issues associated with the bridge.
Yeah, it's
And
silly.
Carly, are you aware, is it physically possible to have a fixed bridge on the alignment of the current bridge? Could that even happen given grades and how high you have to get and all of that?
I mean, it could with significant changes. It got ruled out in the 2010 study. It was discussed, but it was ruled out due to just impacts to the community itself. It would have pretty significant changes to Rio Vista and to the businesses
Because
along
with the
corridor.
grade,
Yeah,
right, it'll have to start
Yes.
by Highway 12 Diner.
it would,
Yeah.
you would not really be able to maintain any of the roadway that you're trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be a
So-
nightmare.
So Highway 12 would start to become an elevated road within what we now know as
Right.
kind of Rio Vista businesses. Okay.
So if the intent of keeping it would be to kind of preserve, the existing corridor, it would not look anything like it does today.
So we'd have underpasses instead of overcrossings.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to get some sense if there's a general direction of the working group. Are any of the alternatives that Carly's described just no starters? Is there anything you want to take off the table? We've talked about an airport road alignment that we understand will go through Liberty and Grand Ranch and then get back on 12 as it's drawn now. I don't know if there's really an option to that. So that's the north route through town. We understand that. And then the south route hits Montezuma Hills. So I can't say there's one that I like everything about.
I have a question. When you look at the map of the purchased land by Flannery and the plans that they have set out for us in that California Forever, where they're showing the homes on the water.
Mhm.
It looks to me like what they want to do is develop that whole area down by Collinsville. That seems to be the majority of where they purchased the land. And yeah, they're showing all this water around where they want to build water sports and homes that are overlooking the water. So it's not north of 12. Down south of 12 would be the majority of where they would
West
build.
and south, yeah.
Yeah, so the, having a bypass through the, up on airport, you're gonna have that traffic coming.
Well, we're all
Yeah.
just kind of speculating at this point anyways. We
Well, sure,
don't
but I mean, that's
know.
what we're- yeah, it's all speculation,
Yeah.
so. But Bird's Land, you know, down at the, down by the water. I don't know if you have a map of that or not, but. Yeah, they
Mhm.
tried to build a city there, I think back in something like 1880, and it just, they built about 6 homes and they were like bugs and marsh and wind, and it's not working. Nobody's buying it. So, serious, I read that.
So it's really the first question, whether we all agree on whether a bypass is the route to go or not. And then can we put, if people agree, then the next do we need to specify whether it's a north or south? I mean, I guess it'd
my
be
question.
ideal, but I don't think we have enough data to make a decision like that.
Just a yes or no on a bypass or
Yeah.
not.
Right.
Well, what a yes or no bypass would give us is we would start to build a general plan
Right.
around retaining Highway 12, if it's a no. If it's, you know, we don't want to relocate, then we start thinking about, okay, ultimately, this is what Highway 12 will become. And let's start aligning our land use decisions for this eventuality.
But I think he's asking, do we have to pick a north or a south?
Nope.
No.
Yeah.
No, but just knowing whether you wanted to realign or not helps us understand what to do with the existing corridor. Even if you don't tell us where it's, if you say we want to realign, but we don't know where, we still then start to set up policies that say things like the section of this alignment through town will stay 2 lanes. It shall not
Mhm.
go 4 lanes. It shall not, you know, we do not want to see investment in a new bridge on this alignment. We don't, you know, policies like that, if we want to get it out of the current alignment. And we
Have
can
they
do that,
ever-
we can do
this-
that without specifying where.
Yeah, I have a wacky one. Has it ever been discussed about keeping this and using the other alignment for purely trucks?
I would assume they wouldn't take the bridge down, would they?
To move the trucks?
No, if we had a bypass, they wouldn't necessarily close the existing bridge. Or would they?
Well, on the, what
The,
you showed, it
the
said
other,
remove.
yeah, the bypasses would have a new bridge. I don't know if it's discussed anywhere what would happen with the existing. I mean,
You had it on your slide, that bridge and the 3 Mile Island Bridge, 3 Mile, yeah.
3 mile- 3
That's
mile
another,
slip.
that's another place, sorry. 3 Mile Slough Bridge, on your chart that you showed, it said they would be.
Can we put that back up?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go back a couple slides.
The
Does it say
diagram?
that?
Yeah,
Replay.
it said they
Says to
would be
remove them?
replaced. So if they were being replaced, that, to me, that means the existing ones will be gone.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to deter traffic off of an existing bridge if the next adjacent one is a toll bridge in particular. So I don't know.
Hmm.
Like, I think a lot of, if it is up, but I think a lot of people would try to cut through. So I don't know off the top of my head, though. I didn't.
Well, they'd use it
Didn't
at least
plan for
one
that.
direction.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess is there data on how many trucks, because well, I think it was Saturday or Friday, I don't know which day, hell day it was, but on the day that I went through, there was probably 70 to 80% of it was truck traffic. And I thought that if that truck traffic wasn't there, we would actually be okay.
So we discussed, truck scales. Raise money, deter trucks or anything, having a truck scales here
Hmm.
somewhere.
There's already a scale there at Cordelia.
Could get 'em again.
hit them every 10 miles.
Glenn,
It's
go
our
ahead.
food
Yeah.
costs.
A few years ago, I was at a Caltrans meeting and they were talking about Highway 113, and the problems we're having with the traffic and whatnot. And I suggested, I says 505, it merges on to 80 and it's always jammed in the commute traffic and all that stuff. Why don't you go and also go over 80, over 80 and to 113, widen 113, go down toward the Highway 12, make an off ramp there, and then over 12 and go over the water to Pittsburgh, let's say. So the trucks could go to Stockton or wherever they want to go. The guy said it's a good idea, but I'm thinking we could possibly do with California Forever, I think is what they call themselves today instead of Flannery. They might want to do that because they're going to have a lot of houses around there and it'll be closer.
Unfortunately, that's kind of out of our,
Well, it's
Realm.
in lieu of another bridge or it'd be something that Caltrans would do.
Okay.
Cheap.
Thank you.
From my understanding on stuff I've seen is that the bridge would be permanently raised, so it wouldn't be like traffic going through it. In addition, I'll say it again for, if there was to be a bypass down the south, I believe current rules regarding, roads is that windmills have to be at least 500 feet from roads. So if a highway were to go through the south, you'd be talking about a lot of windmills, potentially being removed and not, some of our green energy area, not being able to be used. So, that could potentially impact that. And some of these leases go up to 2057 currently for the windmills. So.
Thank you. Anybody online?
There is no public comment online.
Okay, so we'll move on.
So Chair, I feel like we've had a great discussion with, again, not a lot of conclusion. So unless
I agree.
we can coalesce around some types of positions, we're probably going to continue to be in a holding pattern, which would leave us thinking about the best ways to manage, given we have this surface level highway going through town, what can we do to make it better?
From what it sounds like, most of us agree that there will be a bypass. We just not willing to say whether it's going to be north or south.
Could we just see a show of hands? Like do
Bypass?
bypass? Okay, so there's a clear consensus that the bypass is the desired outcome. You don't know where.
Yeah.
That's great.
They want to take all the moves.
Sure, north,
I have no opinions. Abstain,
south.
more data.
Interesting. I mean, I have learned more about the sensitivity of the site, but it just as looking at it from a high level, seemed pretty obvious the south was the less impactful route. So that's very helpful. I didn't see a hand for the south, so clearly I'm out of step.
Just real quick on the environmental component of the south. So this is discussed in that 2010 study, which I have up, and it does clearly say that Solano Land Trust acquired a conservation easement for an 1,800 acre and then another 1,900 acre. But that the road, it would not go through it based on this. So I don't know if that was in any of your factored into your considerations, but
And that was as of
2010 at least. Yeah. So I don't know what's changed since then, but
So the trust may have acquired additional conservation
yes.
easements.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. I think we're good on the 12 discussion.
yeah, I
Anything
think
else?
what we'll have in the general plan is just programs to consider evaluating and studying alternatives from an environmental, social, economic perspectives, but there is an interest in a bypass. Does that sound fair? Great.
Okay.
We did in an hour what nobody could do in 20 years. If only it were so easy.
All right, so then next steps from our side is we'll incorporate some of the discussion that we had today. We're still finalizing the existing conditions report, and then we'll finalize the draft element. So now I think it's time to dive into the policies and the programs. I'll go do one more slide. So as far as circulation and mobility go, we have really kind of 3 high level goals. The first is really aimed at prioritizing safety and accommodating all modes of transportation. The second is kind of facilitating a network and a roadway that balances the community, the local community and the regional, kind of regional traffic. And then the third is aimed at creating a well-maintained, really network that evolves over time to meet the community's needs. So I don't know if anyone off the top of their heads with these kind of primary three goals has anything that you feel like we have missed or added from an overarching kind of perspective. See, maybe.
I think it encompasses the thought, but I want to continue to just bang home the whole point that all of our mobility, all of the different modes of transportation should all lead to the downtown. And then I had a question too.
Yeah.
On your policy MC1, I don't know what D is. It says D and E. Is it acceptable? I didn't follow that.
Oh, on the next
Yeah,
slide,
not-
level of
okay, I
service.
jumped.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So this is the policy that's in the existing general plan. So level of service is the way that delay really is measured at an intersection or along a roadway. So the intent of kind of this policy is to document how much delay the city is comfortable with. LOSD is a fairly common target for an unsignalized intersection. For instance, it would be 20 to 35 seconds of delay is what the motorist experiences. Anything beyond that, you're saying this is, it's getting a little bit too much. And then for a signalized intersection, it's 35 to 55 seconds of delay. So this is the policy that's in the existing plan. There are a couple locations highlighted that LOSE is acceptable, which means you're willing to kind of balance the delay because you recognize maybe the land uses, there's going to be just more traffic in general. And so it's more important to have maybe a 2-lane roadway that has a little bit more delay than widen it to like a 4-lane roadway. So you're kind of balancing what that roadway network looks like.
I think I've heard that an LOSE of signals means you might sit through a cycle and not get through.
Yeah.
But you won't sit through 2. Is that kind of?
Got it.
Yeah.
We need the LOS in the general plan because it helps us to determine what developers need to provide as far as offsite road improvements to keep our traffic moving. The state is moving towards something called vehicle miles traveled, VMT, which is great at a macro level, but it really isn't. Our residents don't experience life in VMT. They experience life in level of service.
Is some of this going to change now based on our decision about a bypass?
Yes, we're gonna
I
go
would think that
LOS
it
F
would,
for the
yeah.
entire city. No,
Oh,
no, we're.
because you specifically have Main Street and, I just didn't know if maybe the bypass is gonna affect.
Carly's team will be running a traffic model. I think
Mhm.
you're still in the process, right? To tell us
On it. Yeah.
Yeah. what those outcomes are. And so we may need to revisit this. We'll have a better understanding of what future traffic looks like. And we're looking at what's going to be coming at us from outside of the
Yeah.
city as well as what we're generating in the city. And we may need to come back and reconsider the LOS and areas where we might be willing to accept that E instead of the D. I've seen cities that had an LOSC.
Yeah.
They have really big roads. There's no traffic, but they've got really big roads. And that's a trade-off.
Lincoln.
Yeah.
And I'll
That's
just
right.
note, when LOS is calculated from a traffic standpoint, I'm not going to dive too far into the weeds on this, but oftentimes we're looking at the peak hours, the AM and the PM. So your roadways are designed to accommodate the peak traffic. But like Paul said, then the remaining, 22 hours of the day where it's not the peak, you have just oftentimes very overbuilt roadways. So it is a trade-off. And
Oh.
from a maintenance cost perspective, a right-of-way acquisition perspective, those all come into play.
Are we gonna have a glossary with all these acronyms in the back so
We
we
can do that
know
for you. Yeah.
where everybody's talking about?
There will be a glossary for the entire general plan,
Yeah.
absolutely. And these will be in there.
Good, thank you.
VMT.
Yeah.
Yeah, my.
Okay, and then the second policy on this is really aimed at just helping new development. When a development comes through, it's requiring that they basically provide the connections for bikes, peds, and autos, kind of as shown in the overarching circulation element. So, are there any questions on this slide? Okay, great. So this last one is VMT. And basically the way this is crafted right now, which again is subject to change based on kind of overall opinion, but it's really aimed at not increasing VMT above kind of what the existing baseline is. So that'd be today's standard. So a lot of jurisdictions and kind of some state guidance, which is continuously evolving. And I also won't dig too far into that, but in recent years, like a 15% reduction threshold has been a target where it might say, you know, right now our average daily VMT is 20 miles that a person is driving. Maybe we want to try to get that 15% below that 20 miles in the future. So you're trying to encourage development to occur in a certain way that will not be increasing the distance people are traveling. For a community like Rio Vista, it might be difficult to achieve that 15%, but if that's, you know, that or any other threshold is really what, you know, is wanted. But at this point, we have just to not increase beyond what the existing is. Don't exacerbate it. So I don't have thoughts on that. Okay.
I have a nitpick.
Yeah.
So VMT, should it be spelled out and then VMT in the first instance be in parentheses?
Yes, probably. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So this is a roadway design standards. This is a very common one to be included in general plans. It basically states that you want kind of an overall street classification system, which would be broken up into like arterials, local collector roads, and then local roads. And within each of those street standards, you have, you know, different right-of-way requirements, bicycle and pedestrian requirements. And it's really aimed at kind of the amount of traffic that should be facilitated through that. So a lot of cities will have just standard design standards. So it'll say if this is going to be an arterial, you need to make it, you know, X wide. It needs this, you know, 6-foot bike lanes or 6 feet separated sidewalks, whatever it is. That's pretty much what this is saying. Okay. Next. Designing for safety. So complete streets are basically streets that are designed to, you know, accommodate all modes of transportation. And so this is just ensuring that future development in the streets that are created in Rio Vista are designed to have complete streets. The second policy is more specific about a Vision Zero approach. And we do have a 2035 timeframe, which actually came from the local road safety plan that STA, I think, managed. And so basically this is saying that by 2035, the city would have a goal of eliminating any fatal or severe injury collisions. And it might be aggressive, some based on some of the eyebrow raises I just saw. And so that is a common also concern and kind of discussion point. Like I said, the year came from what's already listed in the LRSP that was already completed. So that's where this is coming from. Okay, next slide. We have regional transportation planning, just coordinating with Caltrans and STA on future infrastructure projects. An example of this would be something like the SHOT project. Last time I spoke with you, we talked about the grade separated crossings. And so it's trying to get involved really early on when these projects are coming through to make sure that whatever other improvements the city might want, if there's any way to kind of collaborate and reduce those construction and planning costs, then it's aimed at encouraging kind of those discussions. And then we talked about the near term, midterm, and long-term strategies for Highway 12, which we'll work on now that we've had this discussion. Next slide. Active transportation is something we heard quite a bit about as a priority. So this is aimed at eliminating the barriers and gaps in the network and providing complete sidewalks and a bicycle network using various funding sources. And then we do have a specific bullet targeted at planning and environmental documentation for the SR 12 grade separated crossings. And next.
Isn't that one happening already? I mean, between the Trilogy development and downtown, that's on SR 12, and that was gonna have a bike lane. That's already in the plan, right?
Yeah, the grade separated crossing would not be on SR 12. It would be over or under.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, so that's what that one is really, yeah, that's what that one's aimed at. Active transportation continued. Yeah, just trying to look at bike and ped facilities in area with high potential for injury and completing those gaps in the existing networks. And again, more coordination with Caltrans to ensure safety. We also have one about mid-block crossings and trying to provide those whenever applicable or appropriate. What's next? Then this is on transit. So the main intent with these policies is really to, Rio Vista is not, and it's a little more unique in terms of the transit needs than maybe some of these other communities, particularly in the Bay Area. And so there's probably standard transit goals and policies might not be as appropriate or applicable for the community. So this is really aimed at trying to encourage collaboration and discussions with alternative types of transit providers like microtransit or micromobility services even. In here specifically, we reference, golf cart shares, bike shares, e-scooter shares, mobility scooter shares. So really aimed at kind of more the community in Rio Vista itself and looking at not your typical just transit options. And then we have one on about encouraging private taxi providers or AVs in the future or TNCs, and just trying to encourage pickup and drop off locations when new developments occur. So that way, if those types of uses do become more popular in the future, there's clean, easy designated locations for that to occur. Next. And then this one is based on funding, just utilizing different funding sources to try to pursue new and innovative funding options. And then in particular, again, prioritizing funds for something like an SR12 bicycle pedestrian grade separated crossing. Next. And I think that's all for me.
Anybody have any comments before we move on? Anybody in the public have any comments? Anybody online?
There are no public comments
Okay.
online.
We'll move on.
Great. The next item we're going to discuss is the introduction. So this is the chapter at the outset of the general plan that tells you a bit about what this community is really all about, also how to use the general plan, some of the basis of when the general plan will be applied, and some of the explaining the goals, policies, programs, layout. So I believe, Lisa, we have comments on the introduction from you, and so those will be incorporated. Has anybody gone over the introduction and has things they would like to identify? Discuss.
Go ahead.
I have a mini one. Just in the first paragraph, we talk about, and we talk in other areas about us being a river town. I'll just add in on the last sentence of the first paragraph. Residents often note that the access to surrounding urban centers combined with the river's small river town character. We should add river in whenever possible.
Okay. And that the page on that?
That was the very first page, chapter
Okay.
1, introduction.
Okay. Any other comments on the introduction? Gone. Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and get this formatted up as an element that you'll be seeing as in the general plan. I do want to mention, and this will apply to all the elements, that we are going to be producing binders in the next couple of weeks that will have all of the elements that have reached that kind of formatted with pictures, stage maps and everything. And we'll get those handed out. And then at each of these meetings, we'll be showing up with a hard copy for you to incorporate in. So you're going to start to have that document to flip pages and start doing the consistency and looking for what's missing, because it's hard to see what's missing when you're looking at a piece at a time.
I have a couple under the vision statement and the guiding principles. I don't know if Lisa found this already, and hopefully she did. Under guiding principles, it talked about the third sentence, and it says, and by land ownership does not appear to be supportive of development. Because what we know about Flannery, we need to change that.
So I don't have it open, but can you identify the particular bullet?
Yeah, it's under guiding principles. It's the third line. it starts out historic natural gas facilities and the land ownership that does not appear supportive of development.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's,
And that was a veiled reference to Flannery
Right.
and our understanding 2 weeks ago.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. And then under number 1, it says, it's just it's not even a sentence. It says support and attract businesses. Period. I think it should be a little further down the line. It says provide the infrastructure needed to support and attract businesses. I think it might have just got somebody didn't copy something properly.
Okay,
Under number 1, revitalize downtown and waterfront district. It's the third, again, it's the third line and it says support and attract businesses, period.
and then under number 2, to improve mobility and access for all users. It's probably redundant, but I think it'd be nice to include it here. I was talking about connectivity to the downtown through pathway systems, but I want to reemphasize that everything should lead to the downtown. I don't know exactly how to write it. From every corner of town should be able to reach the downtown core. Are we still on it?
Go ahead.
Okay. Number 4, I think one thing that we missed under that is we promote, and this is the second sentence, well, you could read it. It's where it goes in. I don't care necessarily, but we talk about long-lasting development, from recreation, shopping, employment, but we don't talk about healthcare. And I think that's important to be in there. And then furthermore, and so there isn't a point 8, but I was thinking about it. I actually talked to our city manager about this, about blue zones and about healthy communities, and the fact that we're an aging community. We don't have access to healthcare right now within our town. And another way to combat that is by having a healthier community so that they don't have to go to hospitals and get medicated. And so I was thinking something around the lines of creating a community focused on promoting healthy choices and has healthcare facilities that will support all demographic groups or something like that. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I think healthcare is important and being healthy.
okay. Other thoughts?
And okay, public comment.
Sorry, I'm going a little backwards in time here, but I was thinking about the comment you made about the Solano Land Trust land. And if a highway were to go, I looked at the maps and it does bypass the Solano Land Trust, but the Solano Land Trust land is all adjacent to the highway. So you can think about any sort of highway and how much garbage, collects along a highway. All that is going to go into this preserved land. I'm pretty certain that more land is going to be added to the Solano Land Trust in the future as well. And so that was just my point I want to make about that.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody online?
There's no public comment online.
Okay, we'll continue.
Okay, thank you for input on the introduction. Next slide. This is really exciting. We're going to talk about noise. You want to talk about acronyms? All right, why do we care about noise? It's more than just comfort, and at some extremes it's health and impacts to individuals. We will have a safety and noise combined element. What we're looking at tonight is a first cut at the noise component of that. So we're going to be looking at both the description section as well as I'm going over the goals, policies, and programs. We're trying to provide enough context to understand noise without going into the deep details. We all think we understand noise. In fact, we really don't. There are some very interesting ways that noise behaves, the way we perceive noise. But for our purposes, we're really trying to set a framework to avoid incompatible uses, reduce impacts, and when we do have impacts, starting to set up a framework where we can have a noise ordinance that will allow us to address nuisance noise, which right now we don't. And our noise, we know our noise element doesn't really provide us the tools to go out and do enforcement on nuisance noise. So this is a step that will then be followed up with an update to the noise ordinance. So it's always a balancing act with noise. We want to revitalize the downtown. We want to have activities. We've heard of, businesses that want to have outdoor activities and music. All of those create noise. So it's a trade-off of what's the appropriate noise level. We want to have industries that may not be particularly quiet. We also want to have neighborhoods where people can enjoy their yards. So this is always a balancing act. And so we're trying to find that sweet spot that recognizes kind of what Rio Vista is about, what you care about, and really hits your priorities. So with that brief introduction, let's go to the next slide. Every general plan has a chart like this. It was produced by the state, and I'm sorry, this is the next one. I got ahead of myself. So go back, please. This forward. So this helps you understand noise and how it's perceived. So we hear these numbers, 30 decibels, 50 decibels, 100 decibels. What does it really mean? So you get to see some real world things that we all understand what they sound like. 30 decibels is really pretty quiet. 40 is conversational level. When you start getting to 60 decibels, it's, that starts to be like in a restaurant, but not terribly busy. 70 is a vacuum cleaner. So now we're starting to talk, it's getting kind of noisy, getting a little hard to have a conversation. And then, thunder is sitting up there at 120 decibels. It can hurt. And a jet taking off at 50 feet could rupture your eardrums. So there's this whole spectrum of decibels, but noise is much more complex than that. It also has to do with how frequent is the noise occurring, what time of day is the noise occurring, lots of other factors about whether it's bothersome or not. So, but this helps us understand really just what decibel levels mean to us as people. Next slide. This is the chart that you'll see in every general plan. It's the compatibility of land uses to noise levels. And we look to this really to get a sense of our uses in an area where they might be problematic. So if we start to cite houses in noises that have between 60 and 70 decibels, we're kind of in that range of that might be a problem. That's a little bit loud. We have, normally acceptable, conditionally acceptable, normally unacceptable. So this is not the city's policies. This is informational, and it helps guide the Planning Commission and City Council when you're thinking about projects, but it's not an adopted policy. Next slide. This element differentiates noise because right now our noise element really, our noise ordinance focuses on transportation related noise. So that's cars, trucks, planes mostly, and that's the biggest source of noise in Rio Vista. Most of our noise is associated with transportation. Non-transportation is kind of everything else. So it could be a construction site, it could be an entertainment venue, it could be your neighbor next door, like me, who has a table saw and likes to build things. So that's all noise, and that all falls in the non-transportation side. We need to model these differently. Transportation noise, we look at how it occurs over an extended period of time, and we get an average, and there might be little spikes, but we accept that. And that's just what we do then is we say, well, we shouldn't be too close to that road. We shouldn't put houses too close. Non-transportation noise is where we start to have the ability to enforce noise standards, because one of the measures we use is the maximum level, the L max. And that says you can't make noise louder than this level. I don't care if it's 1 second or 1 hour, you can't exceed this. And that's what we don't currently have is like, okay, what's the maximum amount of noise that we will tolerate in a residential neighborhood? And it could be someone with a table saw, it could be someone with a dog, it could be someone who really likes to play their music loud. Any of those things, we would then look to this non-transportation standard. So that's why we have two tables. Make sense? Okay. So that's really the background on noise. If we could go ahead, we'll go into the goals, policies, and programs. And I'm going to say, because I just looked at this, we're going to eliminate policy number 1 because it is a restatement of the goal. So we don't need it as a policy. But the goal is ensure that community members and businesses are not adversely impacted by excessive noise. That's kind of the umbrella of everything here. So a single goal for this element. Excuse me. Little drink.
Can you be a little more quieter?
All right, I have a question while you're drinking. So if we set up a policy and it was to say that it can, in a residential neighborhood, it cannot go over X decibels and the highway is put on, and I'm thinking about the new development, would that require the developer to put up higher walls or put in soundproofing things to ensure that that decibel level does not reach a certain amount?
It's a great question. And it would fall to the developer if they were building in an area where the noise was at a higher than acceptable level. It would be their obligation. If we were to allow a use to go next to homes, whether it's a road, industrial business, whatever that generates noise, the onus would be on that new use to protect the existing home. So it's, if you're
It's
bringing
the
homes
order of
in,
which, yeah,
what's-
so the new development is gonna be going in next to the highway, and so there is gonna be noise. And so would they be, they would be required to put in barriers to ensure that it doesn't go
so
past our policy?
Carly's folks are gonna give us a sense of what the road traffic will be in 2045. And then we have a consultant who's gonna say, and the noise from that will be this. And that will give us a sense of where those noise contours reach. Developer comes in, they have to reduce those noise levels to acceptable levels, probably means a sound wall on a state highway.
All right.
Yeah.
Paul,
So
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Does unwanted or excessive noise level imply that there's a time frame for that? Is it regularly and routinely? You used thunderclap as one of your examples. That's not necessarily routine or an everyday experience. So if you're not adversely impacted by an unwanted or excessive noise level, is it once? Is it 18 times? Is it every day? Is it
an hour
monthly?
or 2 hours or 3
Yeah.
hours? Or...
Like, is
So
there
that's where the different measures do different things. Can we go back one slide? No, just go. Okay, so here we see up on the transportation, we're using LDN. So that's a level day-night average. It's a weighted, and it's also calibrated to how people really perceive noise. And that's over time. And LDN would allow a very loud noise if it doesn't happen often. So that's good in the sense that some things like traffic will have periodic high points, but especially say in the evening, traffic dies down. The nighttime noise, which we're more sensitive to, is lower, but it's still an average. On that second part, the L max, that means you can't make a noise louder than this. Now, we're not going to be going out and enforcing that until a neighbor says, my next door neighbor is doing something. And then we go out and measure the noise and say, yep, you're right. You need to stop that because you can't exceed that noise level at all. So there isn't one answer. It has to do with the source of the noise, depends on how we measure it. The LDN is an averaging. It allows spikes that would be louder. The L max would be like, you can't go above this level.
would it make sense then to, the way that the goal is stated, it seems to a layperson, then it seems more finite than the explanation that I completely understand just gave.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if in that, and I'm sorry, I'm just not remembering if I put this in my comments. I feel like I did because I think it bugged me then too as I read it, that does there need to be some sort of additional definition as determined by LDN and LMAX or something like that, just so that whoever's reading this is driven to the table, the glossary at the back to even understand what we meant by, it's not singular. It would never occur to me maybe that's average, if it's, just that type of thing.
The goal is to avoid people being unduly impacted. So we have different ways of measuring that based upon the source of noise. We have different solutions. I'm not sure that the goal really changes. I think the goal, so.
But
tell me-
maybe unduly works.
Okay.
Because the way I'm reading it, that somebody could come forward and say that this is unwanted and it's excessive and it happened once. Where everybody in the poor city would be going, come on, you want me to enforce that? Are you kidding me? Right? It's a dog or
Got it.
whatever it might be. So I think if you're saying unduly, that helps me get to, okay, this is repetitive. It's not routine. It's not a regular occurrence.
So, adversely replaced with unduly?
No, I would say that are not unduly or adversely impacted,
Certainly.
and adversely impacted, or.
Chairman, we have hands up online. Do you want to get through the policies or take them as we go?
We might as well take them now. So
Okay.
anybody here have
Yeah,
public comment?
it would be best because we're doing these one slide
Yeah.
at a time, so.
So go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Yeah, this is Chris Armbrust. Just a question on noise. We generally don't think of us having any outdoor, concerts or anything like that, but we back up really close to the high school. And one of the things that's really quaint about Rio Vista is that I can listen to the football games on Friday night from almost anywhere in town. And I was wondering how that noise level would fit to the noise policies here. And also, I mean, we also get to, it's quaint where we can listen to the public address system announcements in the morning. And we're a couple blocks from the high school, but I know walking around town in the morning or when the school's in session that I can hear that. So I'm just curious how that fits into the policy.
That's a great observation. I'm probably 2 miles from my high school and I can listen to the football games as well. So I completely understand the comment. Schools are a unique animal. No other institution would be allowed to make the noise that schools make. And I think we accept that. So what I'd like to do rather than try to give a quick answer is just to acknowledge that schools are a bit of a unique circumstance and ask the working group, what is your thoughts? Would you like us to work with the school district to ask that they be more sensitive, or is that just part of Rio Vista that we're okay with?
Obviously, it's not just part of Rio Vista.
Yeah, like I say, it is a quaint factor, but at the same time, I enjoy it because it's quaint. But coming back strictly on a noise policy, it to me appears that they're in violation of the noise policy that anybody else would have. It might be worthwhile to, acknowledge that schools are special.
We do actually have carve-outs. We have carve-outs for construction because construction exceeds noise standards. It can't help it. Should we have a carve-out for schools? Would that be acceptable to the group? I think there may be a public events carve-out already. I'd like to look at that, but
Maybe it should be specific to define it. So for instance, the high school can, and a couple of years ago, I think they did a group, I think the Lions Club wanted to have a concert there. Maybe that's outside of the purview and they would have to get a special exemption for noise in that kind of instance. But the normal activities of the high school, I'm absolutely for just letting it be.
The same thing with the pool.
But if they start having rock concerts there every weekend because they're making money, well, that'd be outside.
Yeah.
Okay, so normal activities acceptable, but special events, they should still be working through our normal channels. We would typically require a temporary use permit or some kind of events permit.
If it's
for-
on the
for
high
larger
school,
Events,
if it's at the high school though, that goes through the
Right.
River Delta though, right?
right, but
Yeah.
we could work with them to, you know, apply the same type of standards we would anywhere else.
Right.
And the schools aren't a constant either, and you kind of know when that's gonna happen, so it's, especially if you're following the sports teams or what have you. But I could also see, like he says, he enjoys it, but his next door neighbor could hate it with a passion. Like, go over there and tell them to turn that down. I don't want to hear the football game. I've got better things to do. Or,
I think I'm not sure that I'm hearing you speak in favor of trying to ask the school to tone it down. I'm not hearing
No.
a majority from the working group.
No.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, okay. And I get that, but
Mhm.
I mean, at some point you also have to say, but you bought a house next to a high school.
Yeah,
So,
it's like the school was there when you bought your house.
yeah.
You know.
Okay, great comment. Good input. Are there others?
There are no others online.
Okay, we'll move
Okay.
on.
All right, next slide. So now we're talking about what happens when development goes in. We touched on this, but where noise attenuation is required, we want it to happen through site planning. So this and the next policy are really saying, okay, sound walls are going to be needed at times, but let's not make that our first choice because they aren't particularly great for community. So try to do it through site planning. If you can arrange uses to minimize incompatibilities, do that. Try to do it through design, and then if needed, go to the sound wall solution. So that's number 3 and number 4. Number 5 is specifically related, as I understand it, the main gas utility equipment that's a problem is the compressors. So there are compressors that have to raise the pressure of collection lines to push into a main line, and those are loud. As I understand, that's really the problem. So this is saying when noise sensitive development is proposed near a gas facility, the project has to solve that problem. So either putting a wall around the compressor, doing something, but it's their responsibility to get the noise down because the compressor was there. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Any comments on those 3?
Just had another thought as well. So I don't know if it considers agriculture or not, but I know that a lot of ranchers use these noisemakers to scare off coyotes from their flock of cattle or sheep. So I don't know if that's addressed. And I know I've heard people within the city complain about it before on social media. So
While I don't think we'll have an issue with ranchers within lands that we actually regulate, that could have actually some relevance around the airport. We did have to use noisemakers essentially to sound like gunshot to get birds away from the airport. And that happened this past winter. So, and maybe, you know, again, it may be one of those things that we want to put as our exempt uses because, I mean, they're intentionally making very loud noises. So I'll add that in under an exempt use section.
I've seen some articles in the past where they say the sound walls really don't work along the highways. Now, maybe that's just because of the particular type of construction that these were made or whatever, but I've heard that they just really don't work like they should.
Well, again, they work,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean you don't hear the
Oh, yeah.
road.
Yeah, you don't get rid of the complete.
So what we're talking about is we're trying to get exterior noise
Mhm.
levels down to a certain level. And when you start saying, well, is it really at 50 decibels or is it 55? We probably can barely perceive the difference.
Mhm.
So I think they certainly do reduce noise. They don't effectively reduce noise for any floor that's
Yeah.
above the wall because the
Mhm.
noise is
Yeah.
really traveling line of sight. So they do work. but they're not perfect.
This was probably somebody that just didn't like the look of a sound wall. Yeah, it's
May well
probably
be.
in their backyard or.
You know, the other, this is a really valid misconception is vegetation doesn't do anything to noise. Noise goes through trees, it goes through hedges. So the thought that we'll provide some attenuation with bushes and trees, that doesn't really work. Okay, next slide. All right, we don't want sensitive uses to encroach in noisy areas. So that's what number 6 says, and number 7 is really specifically talking about the airport. The airport land use compatibility plan established this 55 decibel line, and it's saying anytime development goes in there, we want to be extra certain that the noise is being attenuated, and that probably means construction practices. So thicker windows, more insulation in walls. There's things you can do to provide greater noise attenuation. In practice, we're not going to let any development within the 55 CNEL. We're just there. It's just not going to happen. So next slide. All right. This is that construction carve out because hammers and forklifts and tractors just make a lot of noise. What we're saying is they will be exempt from the noise standards, but we don't want that construction happening before 7 or after 5 unless an exemption is granted by the city. So there'd have to be some extenuating circumstances that, you know, we would allow the construction outside of those. We also want to hear certain, you know, see certain measures included, like you can't have unmuffled equipment. So pretty straightforward stuff. And also shopping center loading docks. They because those guys want to bring their trucks in at midnight at 1 o'clock and do their stocking all night long. So yes, backup alarms can be problematic.
Ordinance 7, contractor observes that, but they're there at 6:30, laying out, getting ready.
Yeah. I would say that that's part of operations, and you know, if I were a neighbor and I was getting woken up at 6:30 every morning, that would last about 3 mornings. So yeah.
You know, I think we talked about it before, and I can't remember. I think it was when we passed the noise ordinance last year. But we talked about the HOA because where I am, you can't start making noise until 8 a.m. But this is 7 a.m. Did the city supersede those? So
No. It's not one or the other. It's both. If the city, it's whichever is more restricted. So we're not saying that your HOA policy is invalid. We're saying that, you know,
the city can't enforce it if something. Well, okay.
Well, it's a fair point. We wouldn't go out and stop the guy who's building at 7 a.m. in Trilogy. The HOA would have to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
But in the instance, and I brought this up before, the golf course, they start mowing the lawns at 5 a.m. And so that would exceed all the noise ordinances that we have, but they continue to. I'm fine with it. I mean, you have to open up a golf course and you can't have mowers out there when people are golfing, so.
Right.
But
and
it must be in our HOA docs.
The garbage collection used to happen early, like 6:30 or 7, and it doesn't happen now until after 8. Explained it said it's noisy, and the ones who came by
too,
the
I
house
have
this
that
morning
problem.
definitely needed WD-40 on all of its cars. I could hear it squeaking like 3 blocks away, but yeah, it used to happen early and not anymore.
So the other item, and I don't know that we've really taken this on, but private gardeners, sometimes they, particularly in the summer, want to get an early start. So that's operating equipment that at that point, I think we would be back to that noise standard, because I have no doubt that those leaf blowers, gas leaf blowers, are way over the acceptable level. So if somebody's gardener is coming early in the morning, then that would be, you know, grounds for a a call and then enforcement.
I have a bit of a sales pitch. Come and get your earplugs at the pet store next week. We'll start selling them.
All right, that's one form of enforcement, handing out earplugs. Anything else on this one? Moving on. Okay. So we're talking about the entitlement review, looking at projects. We will have to determine if a noise study is needed. So that could happen in a couple different ways. It could be that homes are close to a noise generator and we want to make sure they're not going to be too noisy. Or it could be a new use coming in and their operations, such as that loading dock, such as whatever, we want to make sure they're not going to impact existing users. We're going to maintain a map of the existing proposed natural gas wells sites. It says that really should be expanded to natural gas facilities because again, it's not really the wells that are problematic. It is the related equipment. So I think I'd like to expand that program number 2.
I have a question about the wells.
Yes.
Are they just able to drill whenever they want to, as far as, do they have to get a permit from the city, or because they own the mineral rights, can they just drill when they want to?
No, they can't.
And then,
in fact,
and
they
then
can.
how do we know that they're out there drilling is the other question.
I don't believe that we issue a permit for drilling. But there is a new law that says no new gas wells can go in within 3,200 feet of a residence.
Oh.
And that takes a lot of Rio Vista off the board
Yeah.
for any kind of extraction, any type of new wells. So that actually is good news for us because there are rights and there's even been, sites set up for potential wells that now will never be drilled because they're too close to homes.
That's good to know. Thanks.
Okay, noise sensitive use near an existing fixed noise source. The applicant's responsible for making sure noise levels are met. So that's site planning, construction practices, sound walls, whatever it takes. They have to provide that reasonable noise environment for their future owners. Any thoughts? Moving on. Proposed specific plans, PUDs, tentative maps, have to look at existing and proposed noise. So we're going to have all of those. We're going to have contours of the future road noise. So we'll understand what the noise on Church, Airport, Highway 12 will be, the distance from it that the decibel lines reach, and the applicants will just have to propose solutions that maintain our noise standards. So this is just saying, even at the highest level, we want to see those plans. Planned unit development is, a big project. It's bigger than a neighborhood generally. So
Trilogy's one. Trilogy's a pun.
Yeah, trilogy we would normally think of as a specific plan, but they're very similar. But I think is it a PUD?
It is PUD.
Okay. Next one. All right. This is getting to what we want to do as a follow-up. The chapter 1752 is the noise ordinance. So that's in the municipal code. That's where we talk about how we're going to enforce noise standards. And there's a few items here that we want looked at, but these are by no means complete. We'll have to look at the ordinance and think about it, but there's some things we want to make sure that we address that are not currently addressed in the noise ordinance. Okay, next slide. This is just more things that we want to address in the noise ordinance. So another 4 items that we want to make sure. Vehicle operations, truck loading and unloading, don't currently address that. Construction noise, amplified music, so that can be downtown. And then how are we actually going to abate noises when noise are excessive? What are the procedures? So those are all things that we want incorporated into a noise ordinance update. Next item. All right. Again, on the entitlement review, we want a description. So this is really getting to when somebody comes in to talk about a project, staff will say, we need this. We need to be able to understand your project. So this is really just implementing that assurance that noise levels will be maintained. Number 4 is a little bit out of sequence. 1-4. Okay. All specific plans. I think that this may be a little bit duplicative here. I'd ask the indulgence of the working group. Let us take a look and see if maybe this is repetitious of something we already had. Next slide. Okay, can we go back one? So on noise, does it feel like we're getting to the issues? Are we understanding what's important to Rio Vista so far? One thing I would ask that you look at is, and feel free to comment after the fact, I didn't go through tables 1 and 2, but that's where the noise standards are. And it's important to kind of look at those now. And you saw the list of, 70 decibels is the sound of a vacuum cleaner running. Is that okay in the industrial zone? Is 75? Are we being too restrictive? Are we being too loose? So that's really where you start to tailor these noise standards to Rio Vista by looking at those tables. And if you look at them and something looks not quite on target, send me an email, talk to Nick, myself, anyone we'd like to go over them. We attempted to reflect what we understand, kind of the tolerances and the goals of the city, but you may look at those and say, wow, your commercial noise level is too low or it's too high. I don't know. But you folks live in town, so we're interested in your thoughts. Okay. Next slide. It is. It's kind of been, we could be filled with cannabis uses and it would not be a noisy business park. No, so we'll see. I think our industrial park will never be very noisy, regardless of whether it's cannabis or other uses. We'll probably see uses inside buildings, and I don't think they'll be problematic. I really think that noise in our environment is about transportation, and that's about putting the right uses in the right place, or it's noise violators, and that's about enforcement, asking people to be more considerate. All right, we're rounding third and heading home. Next meeting is October 5th, where our expectation is we'll come in with a complete draft of the safety element. We're going to come in with a complete draft of mobility goals, policies, and programs. So what you saw tonight was a preview of the goals and policies. We're still working at a staff level to understand exactly what we can commit to and what we want to take on. We'll be adjusting a little bit based on your comments. And then we're planning to come forward with economic development goals, policies, and programs. I believe that the economic strategy is going to be released relatively near term. So we're trying to make sure that those two documents dovetail. But the economic development element itself is going to be at a much higher level. And I think both documents should be reflecting kind of what you all interested in the business community, in the business climate. You've been saying it for a while, and both documents should clearly, emphasize supporting local businesses, attracting tourism, revitalization of downtown. What can we do to make all of our businesses more successful? So that'll be in economic goals, policies, and programs. Next slide.
Before you go next slide, we have a hand up online.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I did have a question. One of the things that you mentioned, the cannabis, but I didn't see anything in the general plan about smell or air quality impacts, so smell or dust. Are those addressed or how are those addressed in the plan?
The general plan does not get into the specific issues of cannabis odors, but we do have a cannabis ordinance that talks about the requirements for odor control and that it's unacceptable to have odors escaping. I have worked in numerous communities with cannabis businesses, and 100% odor containment does not seem to be practically feasible. But better odor containment is always a possibility. But we will handle that outside of the general plan through the cannabis ordinance and through code enforcement. And we already have policies. I think now it's a question of if we do have issues, how do we get the operators to better control those odors? And I know that I have on occasion been in the business park and certainly have smelled cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, they could lose their conditional use permit.
Absolutely.
If they, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, so
I don't know that. Yeah, I'm sorry. So, yeah, one of the other issues is just, if, for example, in the industrial area, we had somebody who wanted to come in and grow mushrooms. They also are rather odoriferous. How is that addressed? And I know
It's
that's
an
kind of
interesting
moot,
question because as we spent a lot of time talking about noise this evening, and odor is not nearly as well defined as noise. There's no meter that you can use that says the odor level is exceeding something allowed. It's much more subjective. And I think, well, we know that we have an issue of odor with cannabis, without a doubt. If we do have mushroom production, then I think that it's the mushrooms, it's the medium they're growing in, it's all of that. Then we might have an issue, and we may need a nuisance ordinance for odor.
Well, there needs to be a carve out for agriculture too. I mean, if you think about California endive, when their root rots, that's probably the worst smell you're gonna smell in Rio Vista over manure or anything else.
Yeah, I was unaware of that.
Yeah, far worse than cannabis.
It sits in those trucks for days and days, and when it's hot, it smells. It's the PU.
Not the PUD.
No, just the PU.
We live in a PU.
Okay, so I think the short answer is we probably will not be going into odor control in the general plan, but I think it is something we need to be aware of. And probably if ultimately the city council understands a large enough problem, we'll start to regulate. Anything else, Chris? Okay.
No, that's it. And yeah, I'll leave it at that for right now.
Okay. Then the October, I think we're on to November. There we are. Yeah, November. So we're anticipating coming in with the complete drafts of the final section. So our goal, and we're going to try to hit this, is to have a complete set of draft elements in front of the group by November 2nd. And those won't be all formatted and pretty yet, but they'll be the content, and then we'll be able to move towards putting together that first complete document that we would then be looking at in December. So we're getting there.
Am I spacing out, in the packages, public facilities and services?
Yeah.
Is that something you can cover?
It was really being handed out to you.
Oh, okay.
If there are comments, then yes.
I have some comments.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Edwin.
I think, I'm sorry, we just omitted a slide there, so thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Edwin, go ahead.
Okay,
Could I just
second.
a quick comment?
Go.
The
Chair.
would the cannabis smell, mushroom smell somehow be covered under environmental?
If
Because we
if
do
you
have that
perceive it as an
section.
issue
Mhm,
significant enough
mhm.
to mention the general plan, we certainly can. And if you're aware that we're already having an issue that we haven't addressed, then that would make sense. So I think
Yeah.
it really is a matter of, do we have something to solve? And if we do, this would be a good time to say, put a program in. And how would you like that described? I think
Okay.
we heard one comment about, yeah, agriculture smells, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily bad. It,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just part of agriculture. So is there a desire to take on odor control as an issue in the community?
Yeah, I think so. In Antioch and Pittsburgh, they used to have a paper mill, and that was just,
They're terrible.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we should put something in there definitely about smell.
Okay, we're gonna have to take a step back and figure out where in the general plan that belongs, but we'll take a look and find the appropriate section.
Environmental was the only place I thought that it might.
Yeah.
Fit in.
Okay, Edwin.
So under the second paragraph of the overview, I'm sure that Mrs. Heckman probably already caught it, but there's a pretty wanky sentence. I think it's the last sentence of the second paragraph. And you probably just want to work on it. I started doing some scratchings on it, but it was just too odd. And then I think the senior center, I don't know, it's just a correction whether it's 25 Main Street or 45 Main Street.
It's both.
It's both?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have it on here.
Okay. That was it.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, how should we cite it if it's both?
25/45 Main Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my only last comment on that was we call out a specific company, Meals on Wheels. It seems like it would just be meals and community events in that sentence. And it'd be caps if it was a company anyway.
I'm sorry, okay, wasn't quite paying, 25 and 45?
Yeah, 25.
Okay, great.
Oh,
And then,
I had one.
we're specifically calling out Meals on Wheels, which is a program or a company.
It's a nonprofit,
But
I
it
believe.
just comes in, yeah, and just seems like it's meals that we're serving there,
Yeah.
right? And then on the next page, I just called out, the city currently has 2 million water tanks. I think you mean 2 million
Yeah,
gallons.
we've got a lot of them. 2 million gallon water tanks, yeah, but that's
Yes.
not what it says. Got it.
Lisa,
Under law enforcement, under,
what page? What page?
I think page number.
Yes. In that little box, it says
X5.
X2, X3. Okay.
Law enforcement says as of 2023 included 12 sworn staff. And on the next page, it says staffing levels have a general relationship with the current staff of 9 sworn officers.
Yeah, so there's an inconsistent, I think what's happening is one of them is including the captains and one is not, but they need to be consistent.
Oh, you're right, but then not 12 firefighters.
But I'll take a look at it and make sure that they're described consistently. I'm sorry, was it law enforcement or fire?
It was law enforcement.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, one page says 12 sworn and then the next page says 9, yeah.
Got it?
Anybody else? Cause I have a couple. On page X2, we list the address of 45 Main and then we list the address of the courtyard, but we don't list the address of the airport. And that's 3000 Bauman Road. So if we could list that on there as well, being that we have the others listed with an address. And then on page X7, it talks about in the 1, 2, 3, in the 4th paragraph, it talks about Brand Ranch and that will strain the fire and emergency. I think we need to add Riverwalk into that too, probably. I mean, it may never happen, but it's on the books.
Well, it may happen more sooner than we think. We're
right.
starting to get inquiries from CNO that suggest they're really starting to pay attention, maybe have some plans.
Okay.
So,
On page X8, it talks about the schools and it lists the schools, but can we get the ages of the schools put into this? So that we know if the school's 20 years old or the school's 5 years old or this one's 50 years old?
We can ask the district,
Okay,
see what they can
because I
provide.
think it'd be helpful because, you know, in 2045, when they're doing this, they're not, they would be able to figure out how old the schools were just by math, but we don't have any clue here. And that's all I have with this. Anybody else? You're gonna
Great,
talk,
thanks for those
you're gonna
comments.
talk about the Delta Protection Commission
Yeah,
informational items?
we are hopefully nearing completion of working with the Delta Reservation Commission and the
Reservation.
Delta Stewardship Council. We've had discussions with both entities, and I believe that ultimately we're going to get confirmation that we're consistent with policies as we move towards adoption, but we've had productive discussions, and we're now in the process of preparing a document that will establish whether or not the general plan is a covered activity with regards to Delta Stewardship Council. You all can be blissfully unaware of this, just wanted to let you know what's going on, and there's a lot of discussions about reviewing Delta plan and consistency of policies. The good news is all of our land use plans as adjusted on the north side of Airport Road, which is the primary delta, the legal delta, all of our land use plans and our actions are consistent with the Delta plan. So it's just a process we're going through. It does, make very clear this process, but also having heard of potential wetland areas that are out north of Airport Road, no road's ever going to go out there. So, I mean, if there was any consideration of pushing a crossing further north of Airport Road, that's not feasible. So that's not going to happen. Yeah. So it's good discussions, and it feels like we're getting confirmation that our plan is consistent with both the Stewardship Council and the Delta Preservation Commission.
Okay, and then you have 5.2 on here, the formatted draft of the public facilities element. Is there anything you want to say about that?
No, it was just what we just did.
Right, okay.
So we did, we thank you for the comments, and we'll also give a hard review of all of these, and maybe we'll even catch other things that need clarification. What's going to be great is if we start to have this entire document in front of us, we'll start to see anything that's inconsistent more clearly. And so these are working drafts. We're going to continue to refine.
Okay. Anything else?
I was shooting for 2 hours.
Meeting's adjourned. You made it, Paul.